So how's it going? My name is Jim Groom, and this is the second and final discussion we will have as part of Unit 6 of Connected Courses, which is about actually, enough analyzing is paralyzing. Let's build this damn thing, right? Like, how do we actually build a connected course, and what does that look like? And one of the things I decided to bring a different group of people together from kind of various point of views, and I'll have them introduce themselves as they talk, so I won't spend that time now. But I wanted to actually, so much of the architecture of connected courses, at least as we've built them in the DML experiment, has been about WordPress, and has been about syndication WordPress and building a WordPress hub. And that's something that it's near and dear to my heart. I've been doing it as part of my work at Mary Washington and DS106 for more than 8 years. And so I think it would be a really interesting thing to end on the note of what other tools are out there and what are the possibilities that kind of, not just to focus on the tool. I mean, the tool is important, and I really think the tool does matter more than sometimes when people kind of just discount that. But I do want to talk a little bit about a tool in relationship to a philosophy and in relationship to a series of principles that I think are crucial to us as educational institutions, right? The idea of controlling your data, the idea of understanding how the web works, the idea of kind of managing your presence online and your identity online beyond, any one given system or silo. And so with that, I decided to actually frame this session as a discussion about not only connected courses and what are connected courses and some of those principles, but how do they relate to this thing that I've been kind of very interested in and it's kind of been emerging, and we'll hear more about particular applications like known, called the IndieWeb. And so, Mikhail, considering you kind of my co-host, big fan, I figured, it'd be good to have a Russian as a co-host, So good. I was thinking, actually, what would you like? We went to the DML summer boot camp, and we've kind of been embedded. We were part of DS106 before this, but we kind of got brought into the DML notion of connected courses because DS106 was kind of an instantiation of that. So how would you define connected courses, just briefly, so then we can maybe look at that in relationship to this thing called the IndieWeb, and then we'll open that discussion up more broadly with Ben and Aaron, who will introduce themselves in a second.
Well, it seems like connected courses is the sort of thing that depends on who you ask what the definition is. To me, it seems like it's a realization of what we used to call CMOOC, right? And initially, when DS106 started, the big kind of to-do about it was it's a MOOC. Look, it's a MOOC, and it's the first MOOC I ever heard of. And it took a little while for us to kind of ditch the MOOC designation because it wasn't what MOOCs became, right? MOOCs aren't DS106. And to me, it seems that the connected courses is an opportunity for people to connect with one another, not necessarily with a particular platform, but just using whatever tools that we have handy, which is very much kind of the way that DS106 came about, and the kind of the edupunk idea of you do what you need to do with what you have, right? And so to me, it seems like connected courses, the definition of it that makes the most sense to me are courses where folks connect to one another in ways that weren't possible before or aren't facilitated by proprietary systems. I think one of the things that we haven't really talked much about is how dependent we are on open source technologies and the ability to share stuff with one another easily and quickly and inexpensively. And so to me, it seems like connected courses is a realization of that sort of edupunk ideal of let's get together with what we have and let's do it and let's make something out of it. Right. So the whole idea that instead of getting a massive amount of content from an expert, through some essentially proprietary platform, we're using the tools that we have available. We're using stuff that folks have built, like Ben and Aaron. And we're building stuff that the community has worked on for years, like with WordPress, for example. Right? That's how I see that.
I think that's it's an interesting definition. I was reading Ignatia DeWard's blog this morning, she's a blogger from the UK, and she was talking about a recent keynote that Stephen Downes had given. And one of the things he said is, and I'm fascinated by this, is the web is not a platform, it's a bunch of personalized spaces. This is the basis for CMOOCs in 2008. The fact that these MOOCs were distributed added to the fact that this learning was personal. This created a network where the participants generally owned their learning. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting to me that the notion of the CMOOCs back in 2008 and this notion of kind of owning and managing your own data and your own learning well beyond any one class, well outside of any one notion of a silo, is, you know, one way to think about connected learning. I think connected learning has other relationships to it, moving well beyond a class of your peers. It deals with your parents. It deals with your interests. It's driven not just by technologies, but there is a peer-to-peer element of it. So there's a whole bunch of other, you know, complex layers to connected learning as a broader philosophy. But when we talk about an infrastructure of technology, it's very interesting how much some of those core principles of connected courses, or what we'll call CMOOCs, have to do with this notion of owning your own data, of controlling your own personalized space, and of eating, you know, doing it in the space that you control, you manage, and then you push out to other spaces. Which is why, haha, look at this segue. I'm a professional. This is why I am so fascinated by the notion of the IndieWeb. Because the IndieWeb, I think, a parallel around 2010, 2011, was a group of people who came together and actually said, you know, what we need to do is start thinking about the web as not a series of silos and platforms, but as spaces where we own our data, we manage our data, we control our data, we eat our own dog food, meaning that the stuff we create and build should be something we also use. And this notion that I really like, that you don't necessarily build a platform so that other people would use it. You build a platform that you would use and that you will see going forward, and then it's part of the web and other people find it valuable, great, but there's this kind of notion of you're building for a sustainable web, right? And I'm fascinated by that. And what's beautiful is they highlight interface and UX over protocols and kind of standards, which, you know, God, education has not learned from that over time, you know, and the notion to make it easy and simple, which is really why I am very happy to have Erin Jo Ritchie and Ben Verdmuller here to talk to us a little bit about their impression of what the IndieWeb is, and about an application that is in many ways the poster child of the IndieWeb, whether they like that or not, because it's a really beautiful interface that works and that's simple, and that allows people to manage and own their own data. And I'm just going to hand it over to Erin and Ben, let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about this IndieWeb and about the application known that they're developing.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you.
So yeah, thanks, Jim. So yeah, my name's Ben Werdner. I'm co-founder of Known, which is an IndieWeb application. It's the first startup to emerge from the IndieWeb movement.
And I'm Erin. I'm also the co-founder of Known, and I'm the Chief Experience Officer. And I got involved in the IndieWeb at the very first IndieWeb meetup that we had in Portland in 2011. So jumped in right at the beginning because I was really interested in open source software and the sort of idea around your own website and what you could do with your own websites. So that intrigued me, and it's been a really interesting experience ever since then.
I think you know, it's really about people. The internet isn't a collection of networks and protocols and data and servers and silos. The internet is people, right? And I think it's important to think of it in those terms. You don't go to Facebook, you know, to connect with Facebook. You don't go to Twitter to connect with Twitter. I go to Twitter to connect with Jim Groom and Erin Ritchie and so on. And I think one of the things that we've seen with the platforms that exist is they seek to silo our connections from each other. You know, we are treating our, you know, the services that we connect to as collections of people, when really we should be treating our audiences as individuals, as people with their own interests, and not really caring how we connect to them, where they choose to host their profiles. The IndieWeb community, so my background is I used to work on something called ELG, which is an open source social networking platform that's used a lot in education. And what intrigued me about the IndieWeb is here's a community of people who is trying to make it possible for individuals to connect to each other without, without having to be using a particular platform. I can connect to Aaron even though our sites are hosted in completely different places. I can connect to Jim even though his site is owned by University of Mary Washington, for example. My site is over on my infrastructure. There's no need to worry about these silos. And so Known is a platform that provides a single website for all your content and all your connections, gives you access to your whole community wherever you choose to host it, just using the web. I think, Jim, what you said about standards is great as well. A standard isn't a standard unless people are actually using it. One of the things that has happened in technology is that people spend a long time in mailing lists, endlessly discussing, kind of what the technology should be. And that gets in the way of usability. That gets in the way of actually using it. And so one of the things that the IndieWeb does is the IndieWeb community has no mailing lists. People chat with each other, but mostly they show each other what they built, and they learn and iterate based on what each other has built. And so as a company, we try to learn from that as well. I'm a developer, and Aaron is a designer, and that has worked very well for us, in terms of getting something out there that actually people can just use.
Yeah, and I would say one of the interesting things with the IndieWeb, it started out with this idea around individuals and having your own website and owning your own content online, and then a bunch of people got together to sort of explore what that might look like. And from this idea that you should have a domain online somewhere that represents yourself, and you should have the ability to control the content and the data and the profile that you put out about yourself online, people started iterating on this concept. And from that, the idea emerged that even though you have your own website, and this is maybe the primary representation of yourself online, you don't want to leave behind your friends and family members and colleagues on other social networks and other platforms. So people started working on tools and ways that you could continue to communicate with people on platforms like Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. And we started building these different tools in different ways to still reach out and have interactions with people from your own website, but connect with people on these other social networks. And that's been a really interesting direction that the IndieWeb has taken, which has sort of focused a lot of people, and us included with Known, on the idea that you should be able to have your own website and publish content on your own website, but also send a copy of that content to other social networks where your friends and family and other people might exist, so that they can read what you're publishing and they can see the things that you're sharing. And you should still be able to have conversations and interact with them. And that's been a really interesting thing that we've been experimenting with and working on with Known.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jim.
No, please, then go ahead.
I was just going to add, so in education is a great microcosm of this, because you have learning management systems that sit inside an institution, and they're designed around administration to begin with, and not learning itself, which is problematic in itself. But also, we've learned that when students have finished with a course, all of the discussions and the coursework they're putting in often is locked away from them. Often it's completely deleted, so they've got no way of building on that as they continue their learning journey. And that seems to be counter to the process of learning in an institution. And so being able to post all of your coursework, your notes, your ideas to your own site, and then secondarily syndicate it, as well as social networks, to your course software and to your courses themselves. That's a really important idea.
Well, one critique of the LMS, actually, one that Jim has made, and Brian Lamb and Michael Berman and others, is that it at the center of the LMS is the course and not the learner. And the learner is, in a sense, abstracted, right? So everything is about the course. And one of the interesting parallels between connected courses and what you guys are doing with Known and the whole IndieWeb movement is that it's putting us, the learner, the experiencer, the whoever, first, and then allowing us to connect with one another and with everyone else. And that's kind of one of the beautiful things about Known, is it really speaks well to that idea, is that we want to put learners first, and at the center, not the course.
I agree. And to build on what you were saying, Aaron, as well, as that notion of the individual is not part of a platform, but part of a domain, as this started, that they own and control. It reminds me of what Audrey Waters wrote about in relationship to Amber K's notion of the template itself, right? Like, so much of our notions of self have been given over to these predefined templates that other silos have created for us. And I think it kind of limits our notion of exploration, who we are, kind of defining our creative approaches to our interests, which I think does really deeply relate to the core principles of something like connected courses. And these networks is enabling that. So rather than us being networks of siloed platforms, we're networks of individuals working together to create this broader space. So, I mean, I do think, yeah, I think there's some real kind of convergence between these two kind of movements that even when we went out to Irvine in July, as I was starting to wrap my head around the IndieWeb, it made a lot of sense in terms of that. Now, one of the things that's interesting about Known, and I'm going to throw this back at Erin and Ben, you two, to think about is, Known's a particular case because Known, like you said, becomes the first startup, and there's something about Known's kind of design that has appealed to many people right away because it's not taking a hard and fast line like, you want to do this? You want to own your own domain? No silos, right? Like, it's not pulling that. And I should have let you do that, Kyle, because you're Russian. But, like, the idea is that you guys didn't play it, like, very hardcore about, like, yeah, sure, you want to post to these spaces? Great. Post there, but own your own data, have your canonical URL, and take the stuff you're doing, you know, with you as you move through your journey online. Can you speak a little bit about the design of it and how that kind of frame some of those principles, maybe across IndieWeb and beyond?
Yeah, I would say to start, one of the things that we are definitely focused on is making sure that people who use our platform have control and choice. So they have control over their data, and they have a choice of what they want to share, what they want to publish, and where they choose to publish it. And so we've tried to make sure that everything we build in gives people control over their data, control over their profile, their identity, their websites, and enables them to publish what they want to publish in the place that they want to publish with the people that they want to share it to. And so for us, it's constantly been iterating on this idea and getting feedback from our users and figuring out what really matters for people. And one of the great things about being an open source platform is that Ben and I might have ideas that we're working on, but then the community comes together and sends us a lot of feedback. And we really love getting the feedback from people and working with people in the community. And that leads the direction of a lot of the work that we're doing. So we have some ideas that we think, but we also spend a lot of time interviewing people, talking to people, working with people in education like you guys, interviewing users and doing little user testing steps like we were doing just a little bit last night, getting ready for a new set of features, and making sure that we have something that makes sense to as many people as possible, but also gives people in the community the chance to take it in the direction that they want. So partially because it is an open source platform, we have the ability for other people to jump in and build the plugins and tools that they'd like to see if it's not something that we're working on at the moment. And that's been really exciting to see.
I think it's also worth saying that, you know, a core tenet, you know, of our philosophy and also of the IndieWeb communities is that you should never be penalized for owning your own data, right? For owning your own space online. That just doesn't make sense. There's no sense in being hardline about it. What you want to do, like I said earlier, you want to connect with people, right? And if the people are on Twitter, are on Facebook, are on LinkedIn, SoundCloud, Flickr, etc., it does make sense to reach them there, and that's not incompatible with owning your own data. As long as it's under your control, as long as you're syndicating in a way that is transparent to you, that that makes sense to you, you understand what you're doing, then that's fine. You keep a copy of your data, and with Known, by the way, using something called Bridgie, you can bring all of those interactions that happen on those third-party sites back into your site as well. So you have a copy of everything, while still reaching everybody wherever they are. We think that's a very good balance between data ownership and the realities of what the social web is today.
Aaron mentioned community development around Known. Is that starting to happen at all, Ben and Aaron?
So there's a lot of new development happening. The
community development specifically. So Aaron mentioned because it's open source, folks can add their own stuff, build plugins, etc. So
so app.net, LinkedIn, Digo, WordPress, a bunch of different content types, some extra functionality under the hood. All of that has been community development. which is absolutely fantastic. It's all on GitHub. People have been contributing. There's a really lively discussion, actually, in the issues tracker on our main GitHub repository. But there's also all kinds of plugins that are showing up. So our next challenge is really to provide a focal point for this community. We're going to be creating a place for the community to discuss. We're going to be creating a place to showcase plugins, so there's one place to find them, like you would find with WordPress and so on. And really, more and more resources to help people build new plugins. But yeah, we've been delighted with the amount of community contribution we've seen.
Yeah, we've had people who had an old blog on LiveJournal that they wanted to move over to Known, and so they built an exporter to move from LiveJournal to Known. We've had people who wanted to explore privacy and security issues, and so they set up Known to run behind Tor. We've had people who wanted to see what it would be like to run Known on a Raspberry Pi, so they were able to set that up and get that running for themselves. It's been really interesting to see what people are working on.
It's interesting, too. I mean, one of the things obviously Known, like I said earlier, of the IndieWeb, that becomes the application that people have kind of, and will probably deeply associate with the tenets of the IndieWeb, and for good reason. But Simon, I think it might be a good point to have you introduce yourself, but also talk a little bit. I think an issue both you and I face on a regular basis is we have to translate these technologies, whether it be WordPress, to faculty, and actually let them use it and navigate this stuff. And I know you started Connected Courses this semester, and that was a real, that was really how you were going to approach this and think about this. So maybe I'll let you introduce yourself, but talk a little bit about, how you see applications more generally for faculty development, and maybe some specific ideas you have about Connected Courses in relationship to that.
Yeah, of course. I have been quite quiet, but my grandmother always said that you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So I've been listening really intensely, everybody. I've become interested in the platform Known because one of my roles is to how do we engage faculty and really equip them. And my experience of Connected Courses has been fantastic, but I would consider myself to be pretty well equipped to learn in that kind of way. I'm already in the spaces that Connected Courses is using. And I think fundamentally the web is open in terms of its platform development, but it doesn't feel very open to people that don't feel confident about coming to those spaces. And when you look at the proliferation of the ways we have communicated through Connected Courses, that is potentially off-putting for some people. And so one of the things we particularly liked about Known was its a single point of reference, and I think we've referred to this. It is about the person. The person can use that space and feel confident they can go to that one place, connect with other services if they have it, but recognizing that it's not as complex as perhaps managing your own cPanel in WordPress, which is, a different step. So I think Known for us at this stage, in terms of what we've been talking about with Ben, is an opportunity to introduce people to the open web in a way that is manageable, because one of the things we are looking at, and I know that is in the development pipeline, is how you can manage perhaps local communities within Known, but then connect those local communities globally when people feel confident to do so. I strongly believe that face-to-face interaction, especially when you're bringing staff on board with this kind of concept, facilitation in face-to-face environments is fundamental. And so what we're trying to establish is some kind of hybrid development model, blended learning, where actually we encourage people to use the Known platform in a safe environment and connect with a few users in a local facilitated group, and then as they build confidence through a course or a learning experience, they then connect internationally, nationally, and so on. So we're interested in how the Known platform can create these local safe havens for people to experiment without feeling as if they're pushing everything into the web immediately, and then open it up more broadly so they can get the richer experience. And Known seems to have the kind of tool set that you look at it and you go, actually, I think I can work out how to use this without having to read a manual or to go into a forum and ask loads of questions. And I think that kind of access is really important.
I mean, one of the things I couldn't agree with you more, Simon, and I think part of my push recently with thinking through Known really diligently, but working with WordPress too, is, we've been syndicating off of RSS feeds. And we talked about that on Monday. A lot of the work that's happening in the WordPress aggregation is add your feed, make sure you can find your feed. If you have a blog spot, you have a different feed. It's like category, it's like complicated. If you have, where is my Tumblr feed? And funny enough, feeds, people never truly understood them. And as much as we want to suggest, like you said, if we're talking about equity and trying to get more people involved, you know, there's a small percentage of people who could even understand still what a feed is. And so one of the things I was immediately struck by with Known, and it's just a broader concept of the IndieWeb again, is this notion of posse, right? Publish on your own site and syndicate elsewhere, right? And I don't know if it's a perfect match for the acronym, but it's close enough. And the idea there is that, you know, what you do on a known site or wherever is pushed out to those other party sites. And the thing is rather than using RSS and syndication, it's using an API, and it's using push technology. And for me, what I found, and I'll let this open to anyone else, is that changed the game in terms of allowing students to connect their Flickr, their Twitter, their Facebook, their SoundCloud, their Digo, their WordPress. You know, it was really one click, and it was OAuth, and it was safer, and it actually managed that. So I was really struck, for me, about this notion of posse in the IndieWeb and how that kind of helped us move beyond the problem with, you know, pull syndication we've been having for over 7 years.
So, I mean, I've actually been using Known exclusively to post to the social web since June last year, June 2013. So I haven't posted directly to Twitter, I haven't posted directly to Facebook, etc. And what I discovered just as an individual, not even in the context of a course, is that it's completely changed the way I think about posting online. It, you know, I'm actually thinking much more carefully about, well, this is a piece of content first and foremost. Now, where do I want to syndicate it to? You know, where is the place that this should go? And it really changes your relationship to content. It changes your relationship to the networks. And I think in a course, I hope that will be extremely valuable.
I promised Erin I would bother her about this, so I'm gonna. And one of the things that I'm really struck by with Known is like that. Like when you go to Known, you can publish it to Twitter, Facebook, etc. as an update, an image, etc. And one of the things I think that, you know, getting used to use the web, we're so used to being on TweetDeck or Twitter and doing our tweets and responding right there. And so one of the things, obviously, is this kind of contextualized window or reader where what you see coming through any of those third-party applications are right there embedded, you know, as an iframe, however you do it, as part of your experience on the Known. So Known does kind of become your portal to the web, whether it's just that application, but because I actually see the value of it immediately, but pragmatism always wins out. You know, convenience always wins out. Whether we want to acknowledge that or not, give me convenience or give me death. It's not just a Kennedy's album. It's an American way of life. And so this notion of struggling with this relationship between convenience and usability really is something that I think that IndieWeb has good about not being overly didactic about. And like, you must do it our way. And frankly, I think in some ways that's a real benefit to that community.
Well, convenience is the kind of thing where in education technology, it's a deal breaker, right? In the sense that like you have a really good idea, you have a really good tool you're using, and you show it to someone like, well, it's too complicated, can't do it. Right? And that ends the conversation. So, and in this case, we have something that potentially makes this stuff available to folks that otherwise would.
And it makes the focus on UX and user interface really. It gives that in some ways a real powerful kind of different kind of philosophical and principled stance that I think works for users like you were saying, Simon, who may not understand how syndication or how, you know, this is different from another side or how these stuff works. I mean, it's important to bring them on as well. In fact, it might be even more important.
Well, I think if we want to extend the open web and we want to make it more inclusive, we have to make it more accessible in terms of its usability. And people don't want, not everyone wants to spend their weekend in their cPanel or on the WordPress site tweaking it and adding this tool or doing this to it. They just want it to work. They want to go in there and they want it to work. And I think if we want our students to be equipped, we have to equip our faculty first. And I think that's probably that's harder than equipping our our students. But I think we have to have tools like Known, which are actually built upon the idea that it's a human experience, that it's a person-centered experience. It's not a function. It's more about what is the experience like for me as I come into here. And I don't have to worry too much about all the tweaking in the back end, but I could begin to do that if I wished. And so for me, when I'm working with the faculty and trying to get them on board, it's about saying this tool is really easy. Get in here, just have a play with it, and it's really safe because you don't have to share anything with anybody else. It's not actually on the web, it's not actually public immediately. You're keeping it between yourself or with this group, and it's about having those safety nets and being able to build confidence. I think is really important.
It's interesting because what you said right there, like the idea that the interface has got to be human, and it's got to. I heard Adele Goldberg from a 1983 talk talking about her work on Smalltalk, which basically introduced the concepts of windows and browsers. And her whole rationale there was that we need to make computing that people can use. And we wouldn't look back on browsers and windows now and say, wow, that was such a bad idea to make this technology that much more accessible to, potentially half the population of the world. It was a way in, and I think there's that thin line between, like, if you're not writing in Markdown or you're not writing in HTML, you don't truly understand the web, and giving people the access to get to that point. And so there's that kind of tight line that I find we're walking, because I also don't want to dumb it down so people aren't critically interrogating the web either. So, I mean, that's always a struggle, right? Because that's exactly what we're reacting to platforms like Facebook and Twitter, right? They've made it dead simple, but they've also controlled some of it. And I wonder if making it simpler and also giving people control doesn't change some of that. I'll stop there. But Erin, I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about that. I did kind of.
Yeah, so you touched on the idea of the reader, which is interesting because up to this point, Known has really been a platform where you as an individual publish things, and if you want someone to see what you've published, you need to syndicate it to a place where they are, like a learning management system or Facebook or Twitter or Flickr, or they need to come to your website and see what you published, or they need to subscribe to the feed from your site. And what we've really seen since we launched in September is that people want a much deeper social tie and more ingrained social interactions in the platform itself, so that other people with known sites have closer ties to the other known sites, and people with WordPress sites and known sites can interact more closely. So we've been working on this idea and a new set of features around the concept of a reader and what would happen if you can take your known site and still have it be a place where you're publishing your content, but also have it be a place where you're subscribing to content from other people and you're finding and following other sites out there, whether they're known sites or WordPress sites or other people with blogs and things like that. So we've been working on this new set of features, which we're really excited to get out the door in 2015. And if I can screen share, I might be able to show just a little preview of what we were doing last night with some user testing. Can you see the screen there?
Yes.
Okay, so last night we were doing a little user testing with a prototype of what some of the aspects of this reader experience might look like. So this would be a concept of a known site where you're subscribed to other people's feeds from their sites. So maybe you're getting your assignments, maybe you're getting lessons from professors, other blog posts that you're subscribed to. And right here from your own known site, you can go in, you can type a comment if you want to leave a comment on something, submit that. But there's also this idea that you're able to subscribe to other people in other groups from your own site. So you could maybe subscribe to Connected Courses or DS 106 right from your own site. If I want to search for Ben and subscribe to his site, I can find him here, check out what he's been publishing lately. I can follow him. And now I'm getting Ben's content from his own website right in my own known site so that I can read his latest updates right there from my own site. So that's a little something that we've been doing a little bit of testing just yesterday with some people to get some more feedback there. And it's a big new set of features that we're working on and we're really excited about for the future.
what I like about that personally is it federates this idea of publishing platforms, kind of like Tumblr, but not within the overarching system and silo of Tumblr. And I think what you're doing there is really remarkable. I think additionally remarkable, and I want to just show this off for a second if you guys don't mind. I want to show off for a second what the onboarding process for my class has been for Known. Just so as we talked about WordPress and syndication on Monday, let's look a little bit about how Known deals with me having a group of students get on, add themselves to a class, and then move on to publish to that. And the analogy to Tumblr is not necessarily a bad one. I mean, there's a lot of the simplicity of use and ease that I think a lot of us, whether we discounted microblogging in 2007, it came back to prove us all wrong in 2010 or 11. It was an interface people liked, they used, even if they weren't technical, because it was simple, it was quick, and allowed them to share easily. So let me just do this for a quick second. You're going to get a little inception here, and you got to apologize, but I'm not afraid of inception, never was. So I just want to show you, domain of one's own right now, we have Known as part of one of our open source offerings. And so I want to show you something. I can choose to make Known a community hub or connect to a community hub. And this gets to what Simon was talking about as well as what Aaron was talking about. We can decide if I want to make Known its own community site, I could create a Known community around, say, study abroad at UMW. We could have a Known hub, and then everyone who's studying abroad could come and connect themselves to that hub, and then they would just select it in the drop-down. Right now we have 2 community hubs, right? And I'm going to connect to a community hub, say DS106, a course that we're experimenting with Known, and I'm going to install this application. So you'll see right away the process of actually aggregating and syndicating to that course site is already done. I actually, as soon as this Known is installed, will have a little button in my Known interface that will allow me to push my work to, again, that posse, push my work to the Known site for the course so everyone can see it. So if I get started, I'm just going to go through this quickly. I'm going to call it Gym Room. There we go. Password. It remembered all my passwords, which is always good. And then register, right? I'm going to be Ben Franklin for a second. Look how I've done this before. Blah, 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 right? And then I'm going to do here. And this is what I want to get to. This is the payoff punch right here. So here we are. I'm a student. I saved my profile, right? Look at this. I want to connect my Twitter. Click, authorize, okay, this might take a minute, connect it. Like, I used to die over RSS feeds pulling in and going in the feed WordPress, but I can check here, click, flicker, right, connect it. Are you kidding me? Continue.
And also, a quick point is that until recently, it messed with the API keys. And
yes.
You guys automated all that stuff.
Absolutely. So here we have status update. I am testing Known. I'll do with Known as part of this C-Courses session. And then I'll comma hippies, okay, just to keep it real. And then I could tag it if I wanted to. I send it to Twitter, and I send it to my course hub, which is there. And that happened at the point of inception, right? So I published this, and this is going to go out to Twitter. And it's also going to go out on, so there it is on Twitter. It's going to also go out to my site on my course. So if I go to my course site, which is wire106.com, right, and I look at the hub there, which is going to be this course hub, that site, I'm not post, I just did to Twitter, would show up there seamlessly. Check that out, right? And this, to me, gets a little bit at, and I'll stop sharing now, gets a little bit at why I'm excited. I work with faculty and students. I work with, dozens, if not scores of faculty. I work with hundreds of students, if not thousands. And having something that's seamless, that they can actually get in there, share it, post it, makes a big difference. And what we're thinking at Mary Washington, and I think it's an important one, is when people install their domain of one's own. So we do, Simon, actually give everyone a domain, a cPanel, and we like to watch them so we have little cameras in their cPanel to watch them suffer. And we laugh. It's kind of like a lab experiment, right? How much can you suffer in cPanel? But what we do is when they install their domain, one of our ideas is automatically defaulting to a known site. So immediately they have a space where it's onboarding them to connect to their Twitter, connect to their Flickr. So known becomes the default portal that they can ultimately delete and get rid of, but it makes it more human as an onboarding experience that they immediately know that they can share and control that stuff. And for us, known really kind of instantiates some of the deep principles of domain of one's own as a space where people are kind of managing, controlling, and thinking about how their data is published and pushed out. So it's a big thing for us to see an actual application that kind of is representative of our principles and philosophy.
I think it's also worth saying that so all of the interfaces that we've seen so far, we know that the web isn't just about desktops, right? People can use all kinds of devices to connect to the web, and we know, in fact, that students connect to the web using their mobile devices over half the time. So I just want to really emphasize that all of the interfaces that you've seen work equally well on mobile. And so here, I mean, you probably can't see that, but that's a status update. I can post to Twitter. I can post to Facebook. If I was connected to a course, I'd be able to post to my course. It's important to be able to let the student do that from their tablet, from their Android phone, from their iPhone, from their BlackBerry, if they're unfortunate enough to have a BlackBerry. All of those things are possible, right? And so, and as new devices emerge that have browsers built into them, it'll work with those too. It'll just work. So you don't have to worry about having a strategy for this device and having a strategy for that device. The web absolutely transcends that, and that's important to us as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to kind of suggest here, we should probably, one of us might want to look out to Twitter, see if there's questions there regarding some of this stuff. But I would actually like to say, one of the things that I'm still struggling with, and I have been struggling with, is as we think about, connected courses, right? And connected courses isn't one thing, and it isn't one technology. I said that on Monday when we were talking about WordPress, and I'm excited about Known, and Known really represents some of the principles of it, but whether or not Known or something else, right? The idea here is how do we encourage and how do we push students and faculty alike to take control and manage and build on their own content. And I think if we're talking about the next web, the new web, a lot of this is interesting. I mean, we had folks from BYU coming to Mary Washington yesterday to talk about implications of domain of one's own, and they weren't interested in the tech. These were the CIO and the chief, information officer. They weren't interested in the technology. They were interested in how an approach like giving people a cPanel or domain, or like giving them a space that they can manage this, helps us accomplish broader goals of digital fluency.
And that in itself is remarkable that they're even doing that. I mean, the fact that this is even happening. I mean, 5 years ago, can you imagine this kind of thing?
Absolutely.
Not at all. I mean, it's interesting how pedagogy sort of got to the point where this stuff made sense. For those of us who are practitioners who for example, I came up with in composition rhetoric, and for years we've been talking about putting the learner first. For years and years and years, but to most people that seemed like a foreign idea until fairly recently, where folks started really kind of getting that understanding. And you see so much, pedagogies are evolving to put these ideas at the forefront, and so is the web. But institutions aren't. And so, but actually now they're starting to. And I think that in itself is remarkable. The fact that domain of one's own is going on at 5 different campuses now, right? And it's next semester it'll probably be 10 campuses, right? So the fact that we're watching this evolution happen, where folks who were once interested in locking everything down and protecting us, quote unquote, from what we might do if we had the password on our computer, are now actually saying, okay, how do we enable learners to engage with one another? How do we get folks to create and have their own spaces? I think that's remarkable.
And I think it came up earlier when, Ben, I think you talked about the notion of the LMS, and you, Mikhail, too, centered around the course rather than the individual. And if we do think of reclaiming the web as a personal space rather than a platform, right, it will really have to focus on rethinking our infrastructure. And I think that was what was interesting about BYU, is they had already rethought some of the technical infrastructure they were kind of imagining, And domain of one's own became a logical extension of that for them to start giving their own students their own APIs to control their space.
So what really excites me is that we have the potential here to get students to start at school. The idea behind this concept is they could begin to build their digital online space when they're at school and take it through the whole of their educational experience and into their life without having to move platforms to, create a new login for this academic environment, to create a space for this environment. You can just have this one place where you just aggregate your conversations, collect your information. You start at primary school, K-12, you move on through to secondary school, and then you go to university and they just say, hey, yeah, bring that with you, connect it to what we've already got, and you just continue that. And I think we're really at the cusp here of where that is really achievable, and I don't think we've ever been there before.
For me, part of that side of it is, back in 2007, John Udell gave a talk about, disruptive technology, education and disruptive technology. One of the things he talked about that have been driving for me the principles of the domain of one's own since is this notion that, we have all this different information out there. And we talk about education as one case, but we have medical information, dental information, insurance information, and all this stuff lives out there, but we have no control over it, right? It's in these companies, they manage it, they share it with us when they can. Those two companies, we're dealing with one insurance company versus another, they don't talk to each other. And where do we have a space where we can manage and control all these different artifacts of our identity? And this notion of digital identity doesn't just become a technical problem anymore. It becomes a personal, human, political, cultural problem. And it's a big one, mind you. But people start to think differently about it when they think about they have a decade of photos that they want to archive, and they're of their family and their friends. And they have a decade of video. They have a decade of status updates on Facebook where they've interacted with people who have come and gone from their life. And that archive becomes a rich narrative of people's worlds. And that we can't ignore how valuable us understanding and maintaining and archiving that stuff will be in the very near future. And I think, the idea that we can only ever be the best personal archivists that we can be, it's going to be up to us to learn, manage, and archive our personal identity. And if we leave so much of that to these third-party services, I think we give up far more than we're ultimately willing for the convenience we'll sell our soul for so cheaply now. So it's that long-term thinking that I think is happening right now that hopefully will catch on,
I think one thing that Ben mentioned earlier, the idea of the learning management system, and something that we've learned from the interviews that we've done with people in the education space, is that in some places there's originally this concept where you have your students blog or share notes or resources in a space. Maybe it's part of a blogging platform within your learning management system. Maybe it's on another blogging or discussion platform. And then the semester's over, the class ends, everything gets shut down, the students go away, the content gets deleted, and that sort of activity, that sharing, that collaboration just stops. But the people that we've talked to who have encouraged their students to continue this collaboration and who've left the space open after the class ended, after the semester ended, found that it's a much better way for the students to learn and reflect on their learning. They're able to more deeply sort of focus on the self-reflective aspect. They start co-blogging more. They continue to build off of their learning, and they continue to share and blog and discuss things even after that class ends, because they're probably part of a major or a cohort of students who needs to continue to build on that body of knowledge as they go through school. And so if they've been given the opportunity to continue to blog and share and discuss and collaborate and send research and links back and forth, they're able to do it over the years while they're in school and really build on this body of knowledge. And this idea that you're not locked out of your space at the end of the semester, that your content doesn't go away, your learning doesn't stop when the semester ends, I think that's a really interesting concept, and it's a really great opportunity for people to build up this body of work, this body of knowledge, and to continue the learning and the collaboration and the discussion over time and as they progress in their learning journey.
Well, that's an interesting manifestation of what in composition rhetoric folks used to call ownership, which is a term that some folks have moved away from. But the idea of ownership is that you want to assign assignments that get students invested in there's another economic metaphor, but get students invested in their work to feel like it's theirs, to feel like they want to continue to learn after the assignment is over, after the course is over. And we're seeing that. We saw that with DS-106. We saw that with what students at UMW and at Baruch College and places did with WordPress blogs, and now we're seeing it with Known, which is really fascinating how what you guys have built speaks to these pedagogies that many of us have been striving to implement, but haven't been able to for various reasons, and challenged in certain ways that are becoming less failure.
I think it's really important. I mean, one of the things that drives us as well is that one size shouldn't fit all. The worst situation is where people's pedagogies are being driven by the technology rather than the other way around. And so being able to adjust the software and customize the software to fit the kind of course that you're teaching as an educator is deeply important. And we do that. One of the ways in which we do that is we actually have a question on Twitter about the difference. We have a hosted service and a self-hosted service. Basically, we have both of those so that whatever your context is, you have a way to use this, and you have a way to use these platforms. And then we, give you the ability to customize the software, whether you're using it on your servers or ours. So you can actually choose which features are included. You can choose the look and feel. You can choose, as Jim showed, which external software you connect to. And you can extend it in both cases. So, we'll help you extend it on our hosted service, or it's self-hosted. You've got the choice of working with us or working with the community or doing it yourself. And those, that choice, so not just from the student end, but also from the educator and the institution side, is really important, and hopefully makes for better courses. And I think one of the things that we've learned from learning management systems is that thinking about how people communicate and teach and learn as well as administer courses is really important.
Well, I do think also that structures of power that are kind of reified in the technology matter. Like, we've talked about this LMS, and I think Online Courselator makes a really good point that, you have to have culture before the tech, but the tech is also equally important in kind of representing some of the cultural values and principles. So there is that kind of relationship there that can't be ignored. And I also think it's interesting, always these things come back to pedagogy, and you were talking about this with Kyle, and it's kind of inescapable, right? Connected courses as a philosophy, it's really connected learning. And that's all about passion-based learning, about driving your interest, and about kind of defining yourself beyond any one particular context of a class. And that's what the blogs made available when we got excited about them in 2004 for learning, right? Like, oh my God, like a student could write for a class, but also write for an entire community. You could do this stuff, or, whatever the format would be, and it would open you up to a whole community of peer learning, and it would move beyond just your group of students. It might be your family, it might be your friends, and it would be stuff that actually really drove your kind of passions on several levels. And I think we're still there. We're still pushing for that to come true and be a part of our university experience. Whatever technology makes it more practical and more possible is probably what we'll end up adopting. But that's really the goal, right, is to make publishing eminently easy and actually show, students, faculty, staff, help them realize how empowered they can be by having a voice that helps them define their digital identity, that helps them become more literate in these various technologies, and helps them realize that, these digital spaces are crucial for understanding our culture's, some of our culture's most deep structural issues right now about management and ownership of data, about questions of identity and power, about larger questions of equity and access. So it's interesting that these simple technical problems where we talk about a platform often are undergirded and defined by broader issues that I think ed tech, for better or for worse, has been trying to push on and beyond the LMS for real kind of important reasons. And I think connected learning which is kind of embodied in connected courses, is a pedagogy that sits very nicely on top of that, right, and can help inform it.
Mhm. Well, I think what's interesting about Known too is that Aaron and Ben, you guys, you don't just talk to educators; you actually like hang out with us and do stuff with us, right? And I think that's really important because it seems to me that so many of these ed tech solutions are created by folks who just have an idea, and that idea is based on their idea of how colleges work and how students learn, and it seems to be ultimately disconnected from what actually goes on. And,
Yeah.
and one of the interesting things about working with you guys is that you're deeply engaged with that stuff. And it's fun to watch Known evolve as you guys are engaging with us and you're learning with these ideas that are kind of circulating in the community are kind of filtering into the tool. I think that's fascinating. And that you guys are enabling all the stuff that we've wanted to do for years. And that's really good.
We love it. I mean, all software is opinionated. It's all created by people who have positions on the world in which they live. And so it's important to us. I mean, we spend easily over half our time just talking to people. And that's, it is important because we're not teachers. I'm a computer scientist. Erin is a cognitive scientist. I'm a developer, she's a designer. It's important for us to really get to know, what the challenges are both in teaching and learning. And to really understand, the difficulties that you face, the pain points you face. Not to mention that, I mean, that educators are the most fun to hang out with. So, it's fantastic no matter what. But it's also very good for the product.
Yeah, I would say also we take a human-centered perspective to the software design and development. So we know as a company and as creators of this platform that we're never going to be the most knowledgeable people. It's the people who are actually using the platform, the people who are living and breathing in the space, who are the ones that know what they're doing, what they're trying to achieve. And so we definitely try and work with people, get feedback from them, put little prototypes in front of them to really tailor the platform to their needs and to suit them, rather than us coming down and saying, we built this and now you need to adjust to the way we made it work.
One of the things, too, for me, I just muted my... No, I muted. Okay. One of the things to me about being muted versus being unmuted, that's really important for to be muted or unmuted, that is the question, is educators are actually not that interesting. They problematize everything. I don't really like them. But we have very little interaction, when it comes to startup communities, because in some ways we're antithetical to startup communities, right? We don't depend upon investment in the same way, although you could argue we do when you look about how everyone's talking about their endowments. How big is your endowment? I know how big my endowment is.
How well endowed is your college?
We're more about the social welfare when it comes to public institutions, but even that's drying up. But the point being is, it's been a very interesting experience for us, at least, to actually have the ear of developer of an application like this, and to think about it, because I know WordPress, while we had a really big push on that in the education community, Matt Mullenweg wanted nothing to do with us, because we basically were always like, well, damn this and damn that, and that's part of a tone thing probably as well. But it's interesting too, because I mean, I've only always ever thought that technology was, like you said, opinionated, and in some ways a prison house like language. But we need it to communicate. And without it, and without some kind of control over how it communicates and how you can help it communicate, which is why open source seems so essential to me, we really are stuck. And we do depend upon some deep relationships to make this stuff. And so when we came out with WordPress, it's funny that an application that wasn't designed for education was actually the best application we had for education, in my mind. And I think I would just warn you, Ben and Aaron, don't design too much for us, because I'm not sure we know what we want.
Well, there's one of the things that, so we were funded this summer by the Knight Foundation and KQED and the Public Radio Exchange as part of a program called NADA. And one of the things that they really gave us was a design thinking framework that allows us to talk to people. And yeah, I mean, one of the worst things you can do as a developer is go, okay, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? We'll build all those things, because you just get a muddled piece of software that isn't good for anybody. But what we can do is, the more people we talk to, the more we get an insight into actually what are the underlying issues. How can we design for that? How can we build something that actually solves this problem in a real way rather than just ticking kind of feature boxes? And so that's what we've been doing, and that's what we continue to do. So, we want to have as many conversations as we possibly can, and it's all in that, all in that light, the light of kind of trying to get an insight into what people are trying to do and really solve their problems on a very deep level. And it turns out, by the way, that a lot of the problems in education are very similar to the problems in media, are very similar to the problems in journalism, and so on. Everybody is having issues with the technologies you described, Jim. It's kind of, there is a need, an overwhelming need in the world at large for new kinds of platforms. So what's happening in educational technology right now is actually has the potential to lead the entire web.
Big fan.
Well, I have a question. This might not be the best time to bring this in, but this is you at one point, Ben, used the word product, and that's ultimately what Known is, and you guys are a startup, and part of what's interesting is that when we got into WordPress, everyone's like, oh, you guys are WordPress fanboys, WordPress. So it seems to me that there's a danger of us kind of touting Known as the solution to all our problems. But at the end, like if you look at a company like MakerBot, we're super excited about MakerBot. Everything is open source hardware, open source software. It's fantastic. It's like do it yourself. And all of a sudden, they got bought by some Chinese concern, and nothing is open source anymore. And they're not the company that they were. And I think part of my kind of trepidation with engaging startups is that issue. And you guys are the good guys. There's no question about that. But you're still a startup.
We are a startup. I mean, okay. So there's a couple of things to unpack there. The first is, we believe very strongly that if you're doing something good, you need to make it sustainable so you can keep doing it. And so that's why we're a startup. Known actually started as a part-time project, and we realized that it was something that had momentum that people were excited about. And so we turned it into a startup so that we could continue doing it and actually do it full time, which is something we love doing and we want to continue doing. So so there is that. It is a product, as is a piece of software that is produced inside the university as well. Again, it's all about opinions and the opinions of the people who build the software. One of the things you can do in Known, I can't pronounce the name of my own product, is you can export all your data. You can take everything out at any time. We're not locking you in. We believe very strongly, and we believe in this thing called, we believe in respectful software that respects its users. And one of those tenets is the ability to take your data out and put it into something else. So we have a site at freemydata.co that actually lists ways to export your data out of all the major social web products. And you're going to see us do things with that. It's really important to be able to take your data out and have a choice about, not just where you host it, but also in which software it lives. And that's, I think that's part of a difference in our philosophy to some vendors, and I think it's important. We'll see it. We'll see it over time. It is also open source.
I think also what don't get bought by some Chinese concern. That's the thing. Everyone's bought by some Chinese concern. Be different. Be bought by maybe an Indonesian.
What happens? So how principled is the IndieWeb movement, right? I mean, is someone going to come in, and offer you gazillions of dollars, major label contract, and next thing you know, you're the Clash's last album. So
okay. So so a couple of things. We can't speak for the IndieWeb movement as a whole, although they are all wonderful people, and I can't imagine any of them being bought out as such. I think if we were bought by some evil company, that with terrible values, fork our software. Take the open source repository and simply fork it and keep it going as a community of users. And that's one of the things that you can do with an open source project, and it's released under a very liberal license. What we are doing right now is
what is the license? I'm sorry, what's the license?
It's an Apache license, and so that is something that if we go away, you can totally do. I think our intention is not to go away. Our intention is to grow and be a very successful company, by working in a way that is completely aligned with our users and our customers. And so, one of the things we are going to do is we are going to release, we have this hosted service. We're going to be releasing extra services that kind of enhance your known site. But fundamentally, you will always own your own data. You'll always own your own site. You can always take it with you, and us going away does not affect the fact that your site is up. You have that control. We've made those choices really deliberately.
Well, that's the beautiful thing about open source too, right? Is that if you guys do go away, and I hope that you don't, code will still be there, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the other things that you'll find with the IndieWeb community is actually over time, more platforms will emerge and be more sort of fully designed and developed that will actually support this. So if in a year or two you choose you want to move away from known, you can take your data out and move it into another platform, or you'll find a greater ecosystem of platforms that people can use for their sites, and they have similar features and functionalities in terms of sharing and interacting. Because within the IndieWeb community, there's really a mindset to build tools that all can interoperate and can communicate with each other, without any regards to sort of the developer language or the platform behind it. So there's been a really great movement around people building tools for their own websites on the language that they're comfortable with, the backend that they're comfortable with, and then making sure that they're all interoperable and there are ways to communicate with other people on all these different platforms.
And I think I'm going to move my content to that new one that Ben's working on called Noon. When's that coming out?
Around midday.
Oh, good. I just wanted to say, I know we're strapped for time. I think one of the interesting things for me about the IndieWeb, and also particularly known, is that encourages users to take responsibility for data. And I don't think there's a lot of tools that do that. And I think that's very important to recognize, is that the tool is actually assisting people in the notion that they should manage and take responsibility for their own data, because it's too easy to forget that. And so it's more than just a platform. I think it encourages some sense of cultural change in terms of the way we handle our own data individually.
I think that's really well said. And I think it actually gets to the point that, the IndieWeb wouldn't really be the IndieWeb if it was like, here's the next platform, right? Like, it is actually embedded in the idea of, taking some ownership and understanding how this works. And, you want to be in a platform where that stuff's mobile, or we've always said with Domain of One's Own, we want you to have a real clear sense of how this works. It doesn't mean you have to cut yourself off and live in a cabin on the internet, right? You'll play in these different social media sites, you'll still use them, but you'll have a kind of a better sense of understanding of how you're using them, why they're using them, and also how they're using you. And I think there's a real notion there of the educational process. And I like about the IndieWeb, it's one of the things I love, and about Known too, is like, you're not being didactic. Hey, someone might offer us $10 million, and screw you, we're going to take it if we get it. But you can still do what you do. Like, this isn't one or the other. And I think trying to get away from that polarizing notion of that is probably good for everyone, because at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you to archive, manage, and move your stuff with you as you evolve online, as a kind of increasingly, your identity becomes increasingly more complex and important to you to have as an ongoing archive. So I agree with you, Simon, entirely. Like, Known might be a great tool in terms of helping us understand that culturally. But like with any other application online, we shouldn't expect it to be there forever, or for them to have always our interest in mind at every moment. You know what I mean? Like, that's up to us. And with that, get the hell out of here. All right, that was a great conversation, everybody. Jameson, thank you again.